Good morning, everyone. Thank you for waiting. I apologize for this delay, but actually we got much more speakers than exactly on 9:30. Thank you everybody who joined us, who survived till the third day of conference, or just came today to listen to the economic panel. Peter, I think you should join us because otherwise it seems that we have nobody to speak. And today's session is about trade and economic cooperation within associated countries and between associated countries and the EU. Yesterday, one of the last questions of the last session was about the impact of association agreements and DCFTAs on the welfare of people, because it's one of the very important components, the changes in welfare, the changes in the lives of ordinary people due to big international agreements, because otherwise they do not support them and everything can be actually changed. So today we will discuss what did or what have DCFTAs already brought to the countries in terms of their relations with the EU and in terms of their relations between them. Did it help to improve regional cooperation? We will have slight changes in the order of the speakers. Yuriy VDOVENKO will talk first because first Iuliana is still on her way. She enjoyed our famous Kyiv traffic jams in the morning, and Yuriy, regretfully, he has to go for another meeting that was shifted, so he will talk today now, and then he will return about 12 o'clock to answer any questions if you want to ask him specifically, while I'll also be happy to address Ukrainian issues later in this session if there are any questions. But then we have Yuriy, and then we'll see whether Iuliana comes. If not, then Peter and Ramunas, so that we have the broad view from very different perspectives. Yuriy, the floor is yours, and as far as you understand, you have a very interesting study regarding how the countries can cooperate closer after DCFTAs. Please.
Thank you, Veronika, and I hope you have already seen this policy, so it allows to me to be quite brief, but really from the very beginning of establishment Eastern Partnership, the economic issues was on the top of this initiative, of this policy, and it's not a secret that in fact, Eastern Partnership countries in economic sphere have split into three different groups. We gather together as countries which signed cessation agreement, and DCFTA as part of these agreements. Belarus and Armenia are the members of alternative Eurasian Economic Union, and Azerbaijan is in fact in status quo. He didn't become a member of Eurasian Economic Union, and Azerbaijan didn't sign any agreement like cessation with the European Union. So when we try to explore possible alternatives, we took into account that some years ago our Ministry of Foreign Affairs suggested the initiative which was called Common Economic Space of Eastern Partnership. It was suggested to all 6 countries, but in fact the frame of our economic relations is very wide, and in this study you can see on the page on the page 11 that not all our countries are members of WTO, but at the same time we have relations inside common independent states free trade area. So not Georgia, nor Georgia, neither Ukraine are not the member of CIS. At the same time, we still have such format as Guam. We have such format as CEFTA, of course, DCFTA with European Union and Eurasian Economic Union. As we defined, there are not so many realistic formats for our deeper cooperation, and we should take into account that European Union isn't ready at this moment to suggest for our three countries something more than we have in DCFTA format. So, of course, the most ambitious alternative without integration in the EU is joining to European Economic Area. But we understand that countries who are members of EFTA are on the higher level of development their economic systems than Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine right now. CEFTA is quite interesting format, and it is interesting because of using this format for like a preconditions for integration countries to become a member of the members of European Union. It was used in such format for Eastern Europe countries, and now we can see the similar process for Balkan countries. Moldova has already membership in CEFTA, but really for Ukraine and Georgia there are not a lot of sense to join CEFTA right now, because if we have European perspective which is confirmed by you, it's another situation than we have now. So we should think about our common economic platform for our three countries, for Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Of course, we can't orient only on internal cooperation inside of Eastern Partnership, because even trade volume is not so high, only 6 billion in 2016 year, and 8 billion in 2017 year, and we can see some specific clusters in the Eastern Partnership, because Azerbaijan mostly has highest volume of export to Georgia, Armenia to Georgia, Georgia to Azerbaijan and Armenia, and Ukraine to Belarus and Moldova, Belarus to Ukraine, and Moldova again to Ukraine. So three AA countries, they have no deep economic relations right now, and we can't say that it's the first task in this format like a neighborhood economic community. Of course, we should coordinate our efforts for deeper integration into EU, and it seems that combining our efforts in a special platform, let's call it neighborhood economic community. By the way, it was suggested by Georgians, this abbreviation, or neighborhood economic area or something like this. But the main sense to establish separate economic format and knock in the European Union door together. So of course it's only initial study, as invitation to discussion how it could look, and I know again the Georgian experts will continue this topic, and I hope that we can discuss it deeper during next our meetings, not only on this forum, but on wider forum also, because of course for me the next question will be how Ukraine should cooperate with Belarus, which is still important trade partner, or how it should look on Caucasus. So I would like to invite you to this discussion. Unfortunately, I should go, but I promise to come back in half an hour. I will have a meeting with the Ministry of Economic Development right now. So we can continue this discussion on the sidelines of this forum and during next hour meetings. Thank you.
Yuriy, thank you very much. Actually, yes, it's a lot of questions. It's a pity that you're leaving, but
I hope, Veronika, that you are...
Yeah, but I have questions about your idea. But okay, let's postpone this discussion, because you're probably in a hurry, and I'm happy to pass the floor to Peter, who wrote a very good paper about the impact of DCFTAs, actually suggesting that the most of costs are front-loaded, and there is a lot of things to be done, a lot of harmonization work, while the impact of this work and the impact of DCFTA should come later. Actually, we are now in the 4th year of the implementation of DCFTAs for Georgia and Moldova, and actually the 4th year while EU liberalized access to its market for Ukraine. So we are already not in the short term, we're already in the medium term. So countries should have already experienced both costs and start probably to see benefits. Peter, what changed?
Okay, thank you, Veronika. Thank you for the invitation to this very interesting conference. As mentioned, I've been regularly following the trade and economic developments in the DCFTA countries, among others. And I prepared a short presentation about the recent trade and foreign direct investments developments in the region. The presentation is available here, and if anybody is interested, I can, of course, send it by email. So what has happened during this period of first 3 or 4 years of implementation of DCFTA agreement in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine? So first, what we can see is that there has been a very uneven trade developments. We have recently registered a recovery of exports to the European Union in both Georgia and Ukraine and Moldova. What you see here is the composition of the trade by main regions in Georgia. The one thing which is perhaps very important to note is that there has been persistent trade deficit, and this trade deficit has been even increasing recently. If we look at the same picture in Moldova, we see also that there has been a very impressive recovery of exports last year in 2017. You see that the exports to the European Union increased by 22%, and imports increased as well. And what we see again is also that the trade deficit of Moldova has been increasing. Again, rather a worrying development in the long-term sustainability of economic growth. In Ukraine, the situation has been similar, also very strong recovery of both exports and imports to the European Union. And also trade deficit has been recently expanding. This again in the context of generally repressed economic development, and it can be expected that the trade deficit will probably grow in the future as well. So this is something about the regional developments recently. I have looked also at the commodity composition of trade. Again, this is something which is also very interesting. I will not go into the details. What you see on this graph are the major Georgian exports to the European Union. These are these bubbles. These are the biggest export commodities. And on the horizontal scale, you see the share of these individual commodities in total Georgian exports to the European Union, and on the vertical scale is indicated the growth of these exports during the period 2013-2017. So what can we say about these data is basically that, first of all, exports are highly concentrated into a few commodities. In the case of Georgia, the biggest export commodity are non-ferrous metals, then refined petroleum, basic chemicals, and also some agriculture products and beverages. If we look at the same picture for Moldova, we have again quite a similar situation, very high concentration of exports. The major export commodity in case of Moldova is crops and horticulture. These are agriculture products, but also basic iron, furniture, and most importantly, and the commodity which has been rapidly growing in exports is this electrical equipment, which is a very encouraging sign of restructuring of Moldovan economy. If we finally look at the situation in Ukraine, we see again a similar picture. Most important exports are crops, basic iron, also animal and vegetable fats. Briefly speaking, these are all commodities which are not of very high value added, and the necessity for restructuring of trade and economic structures is quite obvious in all three DCFTA countries. One of the important conclusions of previous studies has been that restructuring of the economy very much depends on inflows of foreign direct investments. And indeed, it is one of the hopes or purposes of implementation of DCFTA is that it will stimulate inflows of foreign direct investments. And that's why also I looked at more detail into the development of foreign direct investments. Here, again, a few economic facts. This picture shows the stocks of inward foreign direct investments per capita in the three DCFTA countries compared with some regional peers like Belarus, Kazakhstan, also Russia, but also some of the new member states of the European Union like Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania. The brief conclusion is that the FDI stocks in DCFTA countries are still rather low compared with the regional peers. And one can say that so far we cannot see any substantial effect of DCFTA on FDI inflows. This is a discouraging development. Indeed, the time of implementation is probably still rather short, but I would suggest that one should really follow how the evolution of foreign direct investment flows is evolving and how these investments contribute to restructuring. A few additional features of FDI in DCFTA countries. Here you see the composition of foreign direct investment stocks in Ukraine, again by main investing countries. I will not go into the detail, but one of the characteristic and specific features of investments in DCFTA countries is a rather high share of investments coming from different offshore destinations. Here you have a very high share of Cyprus and other offshore destinations. The situation is similar in other DCFTA countries as well. So this is something which shows that investment climate in these countries is still not very inviting for attracting real investors which would contribute to modernization and restructuring of these economies. The same situation is in Moldova, and what can we conclude, and this is already my final slide, which somehow recapitulates the finding of this very brief study, is that first of all we have uneven trade performance, highly concentrated exports in a few mostly semi-manufactured commodities. We have observed few early signs of restructuring, especially in Moldova and in Ukraine. We have low foreign direct investment stocks. That means that the DCFTA still is not visible in improving the investment climate, and this is even in comparison with some peers in the region like Central and East European countries, Romania, Slovakia, and so on. There are questionable sources of foreign direct investments, and indeed one of the indicators which would suggest restructuring and positive effects of DCFTA implementation would be to observe the changing structure of investing countries. I mean here declining share of these fictitious investments from different tax-free offshore havens, and really trying to attract real investors which would be more contributing to the restructuring of these economies. What is needed is, and again, this is already my last sentence, the experience of Central and East European countries who became members of the European Union clearly indicates that more proactive foreign direct investment policies are needed. This is a complex issue involving improvement of the investment climate, but also providing different incentives to investors, because there is a great competition for investors, and the world situation is not easy. So this is already my final slide. Thank you for your attention, and if you are interested, you can download the detailed publication from the website of my institute. Thank you very much.
Peter, thank you very much. It's a very comprehensive overview of the dynamics of trade and investment inflows, and I'm sure that we have a lot of questions. Please keep them, please write them down so that you don't forget to ask. And we have now the next speaker, Ramūnas Vilpišauskas, I hope I pronounced it correctly, who is from Lithuania, and we can ask him several questions. First is definitely what is the experience of Baltic countries, both in cooperation in the preparation of that session, and also how long did they wait for the first results of free trade and then the session and these reforms? Are we right looking for been said that not a lot changed, or is it a long process, normal, and we should just move on and be sure that everything will be good in the end?
Thank you, and also many thanks to organizers for inviting me to address this issue. Indeed, during 1990s, Baltic states had quite intensive trilateral cooperation among themselves, although CEFTA is probably more known and more often mentioned as a potential template for Eastern Partnership countries within the group that has association agreements as a template for cooperation. But I think Baltic states are also interesting in terms of offering useful lessons, both from in terms of economic impact and policy recommendations, how to combine process of integration into the EU with trilateral, or in other words, sub-regional cooperation. I have to remind the audience may not be aware that Baltic states signed 3 FTAs among themselves during the course of several years of 1990s. Not only FTA in industrial goods, but also FTA in agricultural goods, which is quite rare in the world, and also FTA removing non-tariff barriers to trade among Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. So this was indeed intensive trilateral cooperation by typical standards, because most FTAs in the world which are implemented on the basis of WTO rules usually cover industrial goods only, and not always all industrial goods. By the way, I should say that from the point of view of economists, the best trade policy is not FTA. The best trade policy is completely free trade with the rest of the world, or with all other WTO members, and actually Estonia adopted such policy in 1990s. Georgia took example around 2005 to experiment also with this type of policy, but of course there are limitations to such policies. First of all, resistance of interest groups, and also the fact that contemporary trade is very much influenced by non-tariff barriers, not only customs duties, which are usually removed by countries that adopt such policies, like New Zealand or Singapore, are other cases in the world. So when first best option is not possible, then we have second best option, which is free trade agreements. The main issue, as I see it, for Eastern Partnership countries is having in mind the differences between, especially in terms of geographic proximity, between Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia, also specificities of the endowments, which were already commented by Peter in his presentation, what are the dominant types of exports and imports, how to find incentives to cooperate among themselves in the area of trade, and how to combine this with DCFTAs with the EU and further integration process into the European Union. And what Baltic states' experience can tell us about that. Well, if we talk about potential for economic trade, and I think previous presentation suggested that the potential so far seems limited. Also, the first presentation, I think, had as one of its points that trade potential for Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia among themselves is quite limited. I remember very similar predictions for the Baltic states in the early 90s. Economists from the Finnish central bank had studied on the basis of modeling. I don't remember which type of model exactly they applied, but their basic conclusion was that there is very little potential for the Baltic states to increase trade among themselves due to the nature of the endowments. The argument was they are too similar to have potential to trade more among themselves. And this actually proved completely wrong. Lithuania, Latvia are each other's most important trading partners for quite a number of years already. Of course, there is Poland, there is Germany. But one point I wanted to say, creating opportunities by improving trading conditions among yourself might lead to developments in new industries, in new competitive advantages, and also in intra-trade value-added activities within certain sectors. Of course, in order to take advantage of this, it's important to avoid situation of hub and spoke agreements, as there was the case in mid-90s. I remember EU was criticized for having separate FTAs with Central Eastern European countries, with CEFTA countries, Baltic countries, with the rules of origin which were limiting space for production processes if a good is produced in several of these countries. In other words, these, at least initially, rules did not allow to add the content produced in another Central Eastern European country. So these type of rules of origin agreements with the EU can act as a certain barrier to trade, but the lesson from the Baltic states is it's still worth to pursue free trade among such groups of countries, because this can lead to new economic activities which are not observable or present at the moment of signing such agreements. Another interesting dynamics concerns policies, how Baltic states cooperated among themselves in order to advance their integration into the EU. And of course, Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia are in a different situation because they do not have membership perspective. For the Baltic states, trilateral cooperation was an important signaling measure to show EU that they are able to conduct cooperative policies, so that they are ready to increase their integration into the EU. So I think for Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia, this general signaling effect is very important, even despite the fact that they don't have membership perspective. But we can talk about accession into European Economic Area. I think this would be a natural step in advancing integration with the EU. And what trilateral cooperation could be about among Ukraine, Moldova and Georgia is about showing that these countries are capable of cooperative behavior, which I think is even more important currently when, under the presidency of Donald Trump, we see distrust of cooperative behavior of regional and multilateral institutions. And EU is an example of cooperative behavior, of solving disagreements by bargaining, by deliberations and negotiations. So I think this political element should also be borne in mind, because it is important. Of course, when you have a group of countries that are united by general goals, they still face obstacles to their sub-regional cooperation. One obstacle was that each Baltic state wanted to show that it's better than the others. This kind of who is the leader, and especially Estonia was very active in trying to show that, and they had basis for that. I think that they are the most advanced reformers among all three Baltic states in the mid-90s, that they have conducted more reforms, that they attracted more FDIs than Latvia, Lithuania, and they succeeded in being invited for the first wave of accession negotiations, which started in '98. Latvia and Lithuania were left out from this round of starting accession negotiations. They joined later, and they caught up together with Estonia. So there is this dynamics of cooperation and competition, which I think is probably inevitable to some extent. Plus, there is another important issue, how to solve collective action problems, or I would call them collective action problems, which are also known from game theory. And basically speaking, all countries might have the same goals, but they disagree about concrete form of achieving them. It could be about, for example, cooperation in energy and transport areas. Baltic states have been arguing for quite some time about how to best desynchronize from so-called BREL electricity system, Russian, Belarus, and Baltic states system, where they still belong, and to synchronize with continental European electricity system. Estonia was suggesting to do this through the link between Estonia and Finland, Lithuania to do this through the link between Lithuania and Poland, and the latter option was finally adopted after European Commission commissioned feasibility study, as usually is the case, and it was decided that this is a more efficient way to do that. So in such cases, usually some other actor has to take the role of a leader that solves collective action problems. In the case of the Baltic states, it usually has been European Commission. I'm not sure whether such a leader can naturally arise in a group of Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. Of these three countries, it might be Ukraine due to its size. It might also be some external actor like European Commission. When we talk about product standards and rules which are important to trade with the EU and which make up a lot of association, significant part of association or DCFTA agreements of each of these countries with the EU, I think EU already, by providing the same rules, product standards, is solving collective action problem. So there is no need to argue for these countries what type of norms, what type of standards to adopt if they want all to export to the EU. This helps them also to trade between themselves. So that's just a simple example, but it gets more complicated when you move into areas like energy cooperation, transport, joint projects and things like that. So I think this has to be borne in mind as well. And my last point would be is that such sub-regional cooperation initiatives also as well as DCFTAs with the EU can have beneficial effects, or their effects can be more significant if they are aligned with proper domestic policies. I think what the previous presentation tells us, at least that's my interpretation, is that this uneven effect, or if we talk about trade developments after DCFTAs came into place, or somewhat disappointing effect in terms of FDI attraction, I would argue, at least that would be my hypothesis, has a lot to do with domestic policies in Ukraine, in Moldova, and in Georgia. Other domestic policies which could be either supportive of maximizing benefits from such agreements, whether with the EU or among themselves, or restricting them. I mean, typical policies which are important for, let's say, foreign direct investments, property right protection, judicial system, functioning of judicial system, and so on. Monetary policies also, exchange rate fluctuations. So my very basic and well-known message, but it is often forgotten when we get into concrete examples, is institutions matter. And I think most economists know that, but we tend to forget. These external policies are more beneficial when they are aligned with basic domestic policies that are important for economic growth generally. So that would be my last point. I would be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And you did a perfect bridge to our last but not least speaker, Iuliana. Welcome. Iuliana DRỹNGİLIN, she State Secretary at the Ministry of Economy and Infrastructure of Republic in Moldova, and as far as I understood, did a lot of studies in the sphere of quality infrastructure, which brings us to the changes in regulations, brings us to non-tariff barriers, and bring us to the impact of harmonization, implementation of association agreements on trade dynamics. While you were trying to reach us, Peter showed very nicely the dynamics of all three countries. In Moldova, there is structural changes appearing, that is, the electrical machinery is growing fast and starting to become an important part of the exports to EU, but still the trade deficit is large, and the structural changes just started to appear. So how do you comment that? What is the situation in Moldova?
Dear colleagues, dear participants, first of all, it's a great pleasure. I want to say that it's a great pleasure to be here today at this event. And first of all, I would like to thank you for this invitation. Therewith, I would like to take this opportunity and present my gratitude to Moldova's European partners for their continued support, which has been vital in keeping on track with the European integration of the Republic of Moldova with the European Union. Secondly, I would like to underline that this discussion platform is a great possibility for us to share the experience, good practices, the challenges that we are facing in the implementation process of the deep and comprehensive free trade agreement, as well as to explore common interests which our colleagues from Georgia, Ukraine, and other partners are other participants of the forum. Given the fact that there are 4 years since the implementation of the DCFTA in Moldova by the Republic of Moldova, I would like to mention that the results achieved so far in these years show the confirmation that Moldova's commitment to the economic stability is of the country and ensuring the better and favorable condition for citizens, consumers, and business community. Signing in this context, I will list some of the achievements, the main achievements since the entry into force for the DCFTA, namely. Since the implementation of association agreement, the configuration of Moldova's foreign trade has changed. The EU becoming the main trading partner of our country, and with 68.68% for exports and 51.10% for imports between January-July 2018. Also, an important trend is the steady increase of the number of the exporting companies to the EU, which represent over the 70% of the total number of the exporting countries. The number of the exporting tariffs item is also rising, indicating a diversification of the export to the EU. Regarding the harmonization of the national legislation with the EU regulation and standards, there are the rate for the implementing European standard is almost 82% being adopting. 82% being adopting almost 21,000 European standards as Moldovan ones. At the same time, almost 5,000 conflicting GOSTs standards have been cancelled. Thus, the impact of this action is significant. One, as it helps to facilitate trade, increase the competitiveness of the products and services, and gives consumers confidence in the quality, security, and of the products and services. Regarding the legal framework in the field of regulation, regulating the entrepreneurial activity, there is also significant progress in the permissive acts. Thus, their number was reduced from 400 to 152 permissive acts, which includes 34 license, authorization, certificates, and so on. The process of financial and statistical reporting for economic agents has been simplified also, and it's established one single report that replaces 5 existing reports. It's already launched one stop shop by the state tax services, and where the electronic form was integrated for this report. Referring to the development of the industrial sector that you mentioned, during the last years, the Ministry of Economy and Infrastructure has implemented a series of action aimed at increasing the competitiveness and quality of domestic produced goods, also creating competitive jobs, production processes, increase of the foreign investment flows, including by increasing investment in entrepreneurial infrastructure. It is important to emphasize that the opportunities offered by DCFTA to the SMEs sector, implemented by the Organization for the Development for Small and Medium Enterprises sector, at all stages of this, their development offer the access to the business training and consultancy, access to finance, public-private dialogues, and so on. And they also during this period was created 11 business incubators, which has very good results. Taking into account the economic development and the facilitation of trade, diversification of markets, and other benefits, as a result of implementation of the DCFTA, at the same time we are faced with certain challenges as export of products of animal origin. An important challenge for Republic of Moldova is obtaining the result in the right to export poultry meat and B-class eggs. And there are a number of conditions imposed by the European side for achieving this goal, I said. At the moment, the responsible for this challenge or for this issue is are carrying out a series of actions there, and there are indicating the short-term action plan in order to successfully pass the audit mission from the EU side. Taking into account the above mentioned this part of achievements, I would like to assure you that the Minister of Economy and Infrastructure would continue to make the necessary efforts by fulfilling the DCFTA commitments in order to ensure political association and economical integration with the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this comprehensive overview of what was done in Moldova. And then we have now half an hour for questions. And yeah, I see 1, 2, yeah, 3, 4. Oh, okay. So just Michael, probably the first one, please.
Thank you very much. Michael Emerson. I'd like to put a question to Iuliana. It really concerns CEFTA. Okay, Moldova is in CEFTA, and Georgia and Ukraine are not in CEFTA. In the family of ideas as to what the three may be doing together, cooperatively or in harmony, one hypothesis or question is whether Georgia and Ukraine would have advantage in acceding to CEFTA and therefore joining Moldova there. Can you enlighten us as to what you feel would be the value added of an initiative of that kind by the other two in the light of your experience? Thank you.
Thank you. Just let us collect the questions and then round of answers. So please, next one.
Thank you, Claudius Minogas. So basically what Peter showed us is the moment of truth, demonstrating that so far association agreements and DCFTA are not working so well. In fact, yes, trade is a bit picking, but not too much. But what is the most important, what the FDIs are not coming. Georgia is a little bit different, but so far this is the major problem of the whole approach, and this is such a stark contrast to Central Europe, Baltic countries, which basically FDIs, the main drivers, I mean, of then political also association and integration with the European Union. So it seems a crucial issue, in fact. And again, the reasons for this would be interesting. Maybe you can speculate. I also can note what, for example, these key deliverables of the EU, which we discussed yesterday, includes many economic initiatives like connectivity, includes also certain economic development issues like access to credit for SMEs, but probably we all know that it is not solving structural problems of the economy. So yes, SMEs are not drivers of new technologies, of new exports usually, and so on. And there is very little in these key deliverables on the EU investments, direct foreign investment in those countries. So I think really question how this can happen, what kind of measures, what kind of instruments, what kind of policies could be brought in. I mean, here is basically what makes finally this whole policy of association successful or not. So what would be your take on it? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Then the other side of the room.
Good morning. I am Dumitru Fornea, a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. I'm coming from a trade union organization from Romania. I've been chairing the civil society platform and domestic advisory group, co-chairing EU Moldova. And I am also part of the domestic advisory group with Korea. So I have a certain experience related to what's happening in this regards. Contrary to what has been said by the previous speaker, my feeling is that the DCFTA, in the case of Moldova, it's quite a successful one. I don't know exactly the situation with Ukraine, but we see a total change in the structure of trade, which was before and what we have today. It's a different issue. Now, the main concerns which appears, it's related with the Trade and Sustainable Development chapter, which is one of our main field of activity in the domestic advisory groups and in the civil society platform. How the Moldovan governments assess the situation? What will be the measure they will take in this regard to implement this chapter 13 related to the trade and sustainable development? Do you envisage any changes in the labor relations in the future? What will be the main challenges from your perspective? And the second is related to interconnection of the energy and transport infrastructure, which is a key strategic point in order to reap up the benefits of the DCFTA. What do you think the recent agreement in the field of energy with a European country will help, will boost this, and what is missing from the transfers perspective when we speak about the interconnection? What you want to do in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And the last question, Kaha? Just wait for microphone because we are recording.
Yeah, thank you very much. Also to my question or comment goes to Peter. It regards to figures regarding the trade between EU and Georgia in particular. There was a strong decrease in 2016, that's right. But overall, since 2013, trade increased practically twice. It's not due to this CFTA. The main increase was in 2012, 2013. But then in 2017, we have increased, and now the level of trade in 2017 is higher than it ever was with EU. So it's a little bit, slightly higher. Now, of course, this is not satisfactory level of the growth of trade, but should we blame this CFTA because of this? First of all, looking to the figures of the import dynamics in EU, we see that since 2013, import dynamics is practically flat in EU. So there is no, there were no rise in demand in EU on imports. So for Georgia, of course, with its competitiveness level, would be difficult even if having this CFTA to break this situation and to find new, to compete on EU markets. But in 2017, we see that imports in EU rise substantially. So I think that trade dynamics between Georgia and the EU doesn't depend only on this CFTA, but also on the demand on trade in on imports in EU. And second thing is that this CFTA cannot be really effective if competitiveness of Georgian goods is not rising. And unfortunately, there is need to use this CFTA, but also the main thing is to somehow to help to raise competitiveness of Georgian companies. This is my view about these questions. And about FDI. FDI is the same situation that globally there is not positive dynamics of investment rising in the world, and the same with EU investments. So Georgia could not expect lots of investments coming to Georgia because it has the CFTA with EU, because global trend is not favorable in this regard. I remember that when there was drastic rise in investments in Georgia during Saakashvili's ruling time, Saakashvili's ruling, sorry for such a, but it was in 2006, 2007, 2008, even during the war with Russia. But there was global trend also very positive. So investments were rising everywhere, and Georgia was doing well. So this, my conclusion is, to my view, we should not disregard the meaning of this CFTA, importance of this CFTA, and we just should use it as an opportunity. But other factors maybe are more important if you want really to trade with EU. And one more thing that as regards to what was the positive factor really that I support previous I don't know name, I'm very sorry, that like in Moldova, in Georgia, we have expanding spectrum of the traded commodities. So if not rising the quantity of, but it's rising the variety of goods. So Georgian businessmen started, small businesses started exploring possibilities and in different spheres started trading with you, which was not the case before the CFTA. So thank you. Of course, reaction would be interesting.
Thank you very much. I think we now go to the panel for responses, and then if we have time, there will be one more round of questions. Yeah, Peter, I think you can start.
Thank you very much. So my presentation, of course, touched only few selected and I think most important aspects of this trade and FDI issues. Of course, it is much more complicated. To answer some of the questions or comments, first of all, foreign direct investment policy. This is one of the experiences of Central and East European countries which were mostly very successful in attracting FDIs. And mostly such FDIs which really contributed to the restructuring and modernization of their economies. So if you look now at the structure of exports of countries like Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, you know, the share of manufacturing and car industry, for example, or electronic industry is increasing and has become really a very important driver of the economic developments in these countries. There have been a lot of investments also in the services sector, especially in banking, insurance, and it's contributed also to the modernization of these economies. What was the reason for this development? Of course, the accession to the European Union, very important factor, but investments increased already before these countries accessed the European Union in the expectation that the institutional situation and investment climate in general will improve after the accession. The expectation is that a similar stimulus for FDI will provide DCFTA, because this is essentially also aiming at improving investment climate, simplifying the rules and so on. But so far we don't see the real results. And besides that, I believe that active foreign investment policies are necessary, which means that not only providing more information about investment opportunities, but especially in a country like Ukraine, which is a large country, everything cannot be concentrated just in the capital city. You have to establish regional offices also outside the capital, and to do a lot of other issues, including providing incentives for foreign investors, providing information about investment opportunities, and of course, last but not least, to improve this investment climate, which is a complex issue. Institutions matter, and this is one of the important lessons also from Central Europe. Regarding these comments about Moldova and Georgian trade performance, of course, this situation is much more complex regarding this diversification of the commodity exports. Well, this is true, but I would beg to disagree a little bit, because if we look at the structure of Georgian exports to the European Union, more than 40% amounted the non-ferrous metals, just one commodity, 40% of Georgian exports to the European Union. And then refined petroleum and so on and so on. So this is definitely not a diversified export structure. And again, in order to diversify, you have to restructure, you have to attract foreign direct investments and investments not from countries like Azerbaijan or Netherlands, the Virgin Islands and so on, but real investors who invest in the real economy. Of course, this is easy to say, but difficult to implement. And I fully agree with you also that the investment flows are very much dependent on the global investment developments. And indeed, we have observed during the last couple of years huge fluctuations in investment flows, not only in DCFTA countries, but worldwide. So, but this again is an indicator that there is big competition for foreign direct investments, and only if country has introduced active investment policies, it will be able to sustain in this global competition of foreign investment flows on the global scale. So this is just a brief answer to your question. By the way, last month or 2 months ago, I have published with colleagues a report on foreign direct investments, developments and policies, and the situation comparing the DCFTA countries with selected Central and East European countries and the countries of the Euro-Asian Economic Union. This report is available at the website of my institute, free for download. So if you are interested in have more details, please look at the website of my institute. So this would be my brief answer.
Thank you very much. Then Ramonas.
Thank you. I'll just react to one point about the differences, what could be the reasons between relatively low FDI inflows in DCFTA countries and Central Eastern European countries. Well, we should also have in mind the typical factors which attract FDI. I think one in the case of Central Eastern European countries was privatization process. In Estonia, which opened up itself to foreign direct investment quite early in 1990s, a lot of FDI came as a result of privatization. In the case of the Baltic states, proximity of Nordic countries was also important. Investments into telecommunications, banking sector, for example, financial sector in general, are mostly from Nordic countries, Sweden, Finland, where they see Baltic states, companies of Nordic countries see as extension of the home market, basically. So, again, the question is whether there are similar neighbors, Turkey possibly in the case of Georgia and other Caucasus countries, but maybe Romania in the case of Moldova, Poland in the case of Ukraine maybe, but I still don't see this effect of neighboring countries' businesses seeing opportunities here in the CFTA countries. And again, I would repeat my point, basic institutional conditions are very important. Of course, we should remember that Ukraine is in the military conflict situation. In Moldova and in Georgia there are territorial disputes, or well, that's to put it mildly. So again, the enforcement of property rights is complicated, enforcement of transparent customs procedures, trade procedures is complicated. You know, just an example, in the streets of Kiev, Lithuanian car plate numbers. If some of you wonder why there are so many Lithuanians driving in Kiev, they are not Lithuanians. These cars are bought and still registered in Lithuania due to avoiding fees, customs duties, as far as I know, of imposed here in Ukraine. And this to me is a clear signal of distorted incentives and how much resources are spent in such distorted situations here in Ukraine or in other countries. So more conceptual question would be, to what extent the CFTAs actually brought more open economic environment here in these countries that is important for foreign investors? That they could be certain if they invest, their investments would be safe, they would be protected, they could compete on the same rules, on the basis of the same rules. I doubt that it is already the case. We have much more regulatory alignment going on as a result of association agreements rather than opening of economic environment, true opening of economic environment here, in terms of more competition and better entry conditions, especially in agriculture and similar sectors. You know, land property in Ukraine, I think it's an endless...
Moratorium on sales,
yes. So, this is my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Iuliana, we have a lot of questions about Moldova.
I will answer in Romanian and my colleague will help me in English.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Yeah, sure. As it's comfortable for you.
Deci, prima întrebare despre CEFTA, ce oportunități ne-a dat și care este diferența.
The first question is about CEFTA and which opportunities gave us this agreement.
Colegul meu deja practic a răspuns la întrebarea dată, dar CEFTA...
My colleague practically answered on the question, but I would like to add some.
Pentru noi, CEFTA a fost în primul rând o piață de desfacere, încă o piață de desfacere.
For Moldova, CEFTA has been one additional market for penetration of Moldovan goods.
Totodată să demonstrăm că aplicăm acele standarde europene la care ne-am aliniat.
Moreover, we demonstrated that we apply and we use the same standards like in the European Union.
Totodată, asta dă dovadă investitorilor străini că la noi este deja pusă baza sau este creată și avem bune practici a unui mediu favorabil care ar atrage.
And this demonstrates that for foreign investors that we are very good partner who apply the same standards and to demonstrate that we created a very favorable area for business activity.
În ceea ce privește colegii noștri, Georgia și Ucraina,
regarding on our colleagues from Ukraine and Georgia who are not in disagreement,
suntem gata să ne împărtășim cu experiența.
We are ready to share our experience in application of provisions of this agreement.
Și de a le arăta modalitatea cum să evite unele bariere care noi le-am întâlnit.
And to show the modalities and ways how to avoid barriers which we met.
Altă întrebare a fost de la colegul din România.
The second question was from my colleague from Romania.
Și deci DCFTA pentru noi a fost foarte useful.
The safety agreement has been a very big, useful and a big challenge for us.
Deoarece ne-a dat posibilitatea să atragem investitori și recent am semnat primul pas, am semnat primul acord de construcție a gazoductului.
This agreement gave us a possibility to pass on the other level, and recently we signed the new agreement regarding on gazoduct Gazoyaș-Ungheni, which gave us possibility to assure Republic of Moldova with gas.
Asta este o posibilitate de a nu depinde atât de Federația Rusă.
It is a possibility to be sure to have an alternative for gas furniture and not to be fully dependent on Russian gas. And this gives us the possibility to pass on the other level, the next level.
And one more question was?
There is also a question about transport connectivity and the trade and sustainable development.
Now we are in the process of negotiation with EFTA countries, and just recently, State Secretary just finished the third round of negotiations in free trade agreement with China. In this agreement also has been included chapter of investments.
And about environment, as far as understood, and social dimension, because this is very important as far as I understood. Are there any developments here?
Now we are in the process of harmonization of European standards and regulations, and the second in this field, and the second step is implementation of them. Now we have strategy 2030, which include a chapter cover this sustainable development, and exist action plan which include all necessary actions for implementation. And these actions are in the process of implementation and are in accordance with EU standards.
Thank you very much. We have actually 5 more minutes, so we can take 1 or 2 brief questions, if any.
Hello, my name is Mantas Ekmachus. I'm from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Lithuania. There was a discussion in the first round of questions about FDIs and what could be done in order to increase the FDIs into the region. But what is alarming us is indeed the trade deficit and the extremely low export to the EU from the DCFTA countries. In your view, what could be done by the governments, but also by the EU side, in order to increase the exports? And to also think about the increase of exports from the small and medium enterprises and also from the SMEs that are based in the regions, because depending on this, in our view, the whole success of the DCFTA is very much linked, and the whole success of the European integration of these countries is dependent, because if the businesses start exporting more to Europe, they will certainly feel the benefits, and many people in the regions, especially, they will feel the benefits. But if the SMEs fail to do this, the public support for the European integration processes are also at risk in our view, and therefore I would really appreciate your insights about exports and how to increase them and how to involve the SMEs.
Thank you. I think that's enough to discuss, and I would like to start this time with Iuliana, if possible, that you reflect on SMEs, and then Rasmus and Peter, and I will conclude.
That we already did. We applied different program and different project that helps SMEs to increase their exports. We start with development the product to establish all the steps of that must to be passed, yeah, and we help them to get or to find a partner in the EU country, and to help to export, even to export. We have such a program. Also, this is the first that we did. Okay, if I will remember. Maybe.
Okay, thank you. And also you can definitely discuss it after the panel. Yeah, please.
Very briefly, what can you do to create conditions for more exports from DCFTA countries to the EU to really liberalize trade? What I mean, to remove barriers to trade in agriculture, for example, where Ukraine and some other of these countries have competitive advantages. Now EU has not liberalized trade in agriculture due to quite well-known reasons, to protectionist groups in France and in other EU member states. So that is one simple answer. Another, to what can these countries do, their governments, I think we already discussed one measure to attract more FDIs, because FDIs often are linked with exports. When they perform certain productive functions, then they export, let's say, back into the EU. We have this in Central European countries where German companies are producing and then they are trading in the rest of the EU. We had recently several huge investments in Lithuania, productive investments by German companies, and they plan to export their automobile components and other stuff. So that's one way. What concerns SMEs specifically, well, SMEs are usually not big exporters, generally speaking, so I would be realistic to what extent they could take advantage of the CFTA. I think for them it's much more important to have lower regulatory burden, lower administrative burden to do business in general, to be entrepreneurs in their own countries, first of all. If they see opportunities, then they might export into neighboring EU member states. But, well, we know in the EU also that most SMEs are active in their domestic markets rather than trading across borders, in particular in services sectors.
Thank you, Ramunas and Peter.
Okay, just a few additional suggestions regarding this import restrictions imposed by the European Union on some selected sensitive products, these so-called tariff rate quotas, which are still being applied by the European Union on exports of things like sugar, like other grain and other important agricultural commodities. This is a serious barrier for expanding exports, although I have to say that the European Union already raised these tariff rate quotas recently, which was, by the way, one of the recommendations of our earlier study from 2016. So this is very important. Again, apart from the foreign direct investments, which are necessary for increasing exports, another important factor or sector is agriculture. In countries like Georgia, Moldova, especially in Georgia, we have a huge number of small-scale private farmers who produce basically for self-subsistence, and they are simply not able to export, not only because they don't have enough know-how and contacts, but also because they are not able to satisfy the sanitary and phytosanitary requirements enable to be able to export to the demanding European market. So one of the recommendations is that there will be inevitable process of concentration of agriculture producers in countries like Georgia, for example, which will lead to loss of jobs also. This will be a very painful side effects of, let's say, European integration of a country like Georgia. But this is an inevitable step for modernization of the economy. So the closing remark is perhaps that one see huge opportunities in the DCFTA implementation, but there are many challenges, and benefits are visible or will hopefully potentially be achieved only after some time after these agreements are truly implemented. So it will not be an easy task, and certainly this is not a panacea for smooth economic growth and development in the future. So one has to be aware of the complications.
Peter, thank you very much. You did a great summary. I wanted to add about Ukraine, but probably I will not, because you already summarized it so nicely. I don't want to interfere in this domestic experience. Just once again highlight that all three countries are doing having some progress in implementation. There are signs of the growth, but mostly in trade and some growth in restructuring, but not in foreign direct investments. There are very many factors, not only the guilty of countries themselves, it's the external environment, military conflicts, and other factors, but still each country has a lot to do to ensure that the opportunities provided by association agreements and DCFTAs are really realized, and not we are searching for them, but they became obvious for everybody who observes the country in the world. Thank you.